Hi, everybody. Dave Walker again with the B to SMB Institute. I like to believe I'm an incredibly knowledgeable person about all the players in the B to SMB space, but I did not know about Womply until my good friend Eric Groves of Alignable introduced me just a few weeks ago. So I'm really thrilled to have Brad Plothow here, who is VP of what,
Mark,
Brad? Of
VP
marketing
Marketing.
for Womply, and we're just going to talk about first of all, get to know who Womply is, because I'm hopeful that many in our audience will make the pleasant discovery I did a couple weeks ago, but also to really talk about a lot of the data and insights that they gain, and I'm sure Brad will explain the methodology by which they gain it. That really can be informative as we all try to figure out what the state of SMB is. So Brad, that was a long-winded introduction. I apologize, but the stage is yours. Tell us about yourself and about Womply.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Glad to be here. Always glad to be talking to anybody who serves the world of small businesses. That's certainly the world that we live in at Womply. So happy to tell you a bit more about us and then get to some things that we've been doing and that maybe are relevant to other folks that you speak with on a regular basis. So my name is Brad Plothow, Vice President of Marketing at Womply, and I oversee all of our marketing efforts at the company. And we are a data company primarily, and we serve kind of two main markets. One is directly small businesses. The other is sort of larger organizations that also serve small businesses. So we acquire data through a number of means, including partnerships with financial services companies. And we use that data, which small businesses typically don't have great access to build for small businesses a software product that allows them to do things like understand, how their business is trending, not just in relation to their own performance, but the market, other businesses like theirs. They also can, read and respond to all their online reviews in one place. They can accept payments from customers. They can keep track of their best customers very easily. So it's sort of like a full commerce platform for small businesses. And so it does a lot of the things that you would imagine, for example, Square does, except we don't handle the point of sale. We partner with companies that do that. And on the other side of the equation, because we have all this great data, this rich data that helps small businesses, we can only serve, so many of them with the things that we've built. Other people are building great things as well. We're serving small businesses with services. And so we provide APIs, access to data through APIs and S3 connections and other sort of custom connections to that data. So a company that builds software for small businesses might use our API product to build better applications for small businesses or to enrich their existing applications. Large government organizations, large financial companies use our data also to sort of understand the small business economy, to be able to figure out where they should be investing with small businesses or in the ecosystems around small businesses, or in some ways to service them with better products, financial products, or in the case of the government, to better understand where maybe some targeted interventions might be. So we serve a pretty wide array of companies and organizational types. But on the small business side, we have about 500,000 businesses using our software, either on a paid or a free version. On the other side of the house, we have a whole bunch of kind of household names, everyone from the Treasury Department to Harvard University to Tyler Technologies and Bloomberg. Lots of mainstream news organizations also cite our data regularly because it provides a pretty good window into what's happening on Main Street. So that's a little bit about Womply. We've been around since 2011, headquartered in San Francisco, but we are a remote first company due to COVID now. So we have people all over the country now, and we serve small businesses all over the country as well.
So, okay, I think that it will take some people by surprise, the breadth and the magnitude of your reach, particularly amongst small businesses. Is it because of your direct marketing to them? Do you come in really through the channel of point of sale or transaction support providers? How do you get to the level of 500,000 small business?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And usually when you see a business that has that kind of penetration, it is sort of more of a household name. And I think this reflects the evolution of Womply over the years. So currently we have a very robust direct business. So if you wanted to try Womply's software as a small business, you just go to our website, you sign up for a free account, you test drive it. And if you wanted to add new features and functionality, you could just do that on your own. You could self-serve your way
Hmm.
to using Womply's full capabilities. In the past, though, no matter how much you wanted to pay us as a small business owner, you may not have been able to get access to it directly. And the reason for that was because initially, as we were building up our data capabilities, building up our software capabilities, our primary go-to-market was through partners in the financial services industry. And these were like merchant service providers, credit card processors, those kinds of companies. We were sort of building the Square for small businesses that don't use Square. So there's this whole robust software layer in Square if you're using their point of sale service. And if you're using a kind of more traditional credit card processing or merchant services company, you may not have access to that kind of software and those benefits that come from that software. And so we were building that for some of the world's largest credit card processing companies, some of the world's largest merchant services companies. And so what would happen is if you were part of the portfolio, for example, for Vantiv or WorldPay or TSYS or Elevon, you would have access to our software as a member of that processing service, and you might pay a marginal fee for our software on top of that. In the years since then, we've built up our capabilities so that in the last couple of years, we've been able to go directly to market in addition to keeping, those footholds with the existing merchant services industry. So now lots of ways to experience Womply, including directly, but it hasn't always been that way.
That's fascinating. I mean, and I think that you are effectively plugged into the transactional data of each of these small merchants, right?
That's right. So that's one of the great benefits. So we have a whole bunch of different kinds of data. We talk mostly about the transaction data because it's the most useful for understanding commerce happening with local businesses in very specific places and very specific industries. If you want to know how many people are taking out a card out of their wallet and swiping it with small businesses, we've got a better view on that than anybody really in the country, because we don't just have data for those 500,000 small businesses that use Womply. We have transaction data for 10 million small businesses. That allows us to help those businesses benchmark their performance anonymously in an aggregated way against, similar, if they're a restaurant, it's like, well, here's how you're doing against restaurants in your area, or here's how you're doing against sort of the typical volume of sales in your market. And so that volume is really important. And so we've had to go through a lot of important technical and regulatory steps to do that. We're a PCI level 1 compliant company, which is sort of the highest bar for companies that deal with credit card transaction data. We also have a whole bunch of other data. I mean, when you think about what is useful to a small business owner, we build automatically customer profiles for them and house that in a customer directory, which is tied to the swipe. So if someone accepts terms of service to engage with this business, they may also opt into email marketing. And so that allows the business to automatically email market to them. And so we may have that person's email address. So there's lots of data like that is in our system, but it is typically, the transaction data is most useful to understanding what's going on economically in the country.
So thank you. That was a really, really terrific overview of who you are and what you do, and very informative. So let's segue into, you guys are obviously deeply plugged in and to small business, and the proverbial, what hits the fan. And, depending on where you were in the country, somewhere between February and March. What were some of the early things that you saw that were trend breaking? I mean, that were just like breathtaking, or oh my God, this is terrible, or no, this is not as bad as we thought. What were some of those big insights that you had then?
Yeah, let me step back and give you a bit of context so you can know what we were watching and what we saw. So what we were watching, first of all, for the last, call it 3.5 years, we have, in addition to our commercial businesses of selling software to small businesses, selling APIs to larger organizations and government agencies and so forth, we also have this sort of public affairs arm where we do go out and use the same data in an aggregated and anonymized way, and we analyze it regularly to understand trends in the economy and try to illuminate what's happening. And so we didn't just start looking at this during COVID. We had been doing this for years. So every year, for example, we publish what we call our State of Local Restaurants report, where we just look at the restaurant industry. We benchmark what a typical day is, what seasonality looks like, and we show what the ebbs and flows look like throughout the course of a year for restaurants. We do the same thing for retail and for other kinds of industries with regard to small businesses. So we're not looking at, Applebee's, we're not looking at, Walmart, we're looking at independent shops. And when we do that, we're obviously looking at a benchmark, and we're seeing that year over year. We also have what we call our small business almanac, which we update regularly on a quarterly basis, which basically shows is demand for the products and services that small businesses provide increasing, or is it decreasing? And we've seen that it's been 5 to 10% across most industries, increasing year over year. And so there is as the economy has grown, you've certainly seen the benefits accrue to small businesses. They've been doing very well on a revenue basis for the last, call it 4 years. And so that certainly is how 2020 started out as well. In the first few months of the year, across all industries that we watched, we were seeing pretty strong, robust year-over-year growth. And we look at this seasonally. So there's two metrics that we basically look at. One is on a year-over-year basis, how is revenue performing this year versus last year? And we do on a daily basis, we'll watch that. So this day versus the same day of the week last year. So that we can account for seasonality. And the second thing is we look at business closures, the percent of businesses who are regularly transacting, and then they suddenly stop transacting for an extended period of time. And so we were watching both of these things. And when COVID hit, we immediately saw two things. One was that year over year transaction revenue volume fell off a cliff. In some cases, it was more than 100% lower than last year. And you wonder, well, how can that be the case? In the case of a hospitality business, they may actually be issuing refunds in excess of the complete.
I never thought of that, but you're exactly right. You're exactly right. I get it.
So that was, we saw that, typically in the weeks after, call it mid-March, between mid-March and mid-April, most industries saw at least 50% drop in revenue on a year-over-year basis. And some of them were as bad as 80 to 90%. Health and beauty was just eradicated. You talk about, famously people not getting haircuts. That was absolutely not happening with local shops, according to our data. And we also started to watch closure rates. Now, obviously, closures are a lagging indicator. And the way that we look at this is if you're transacting regularly and then you stop completely, zero transaction volume for at least 3 days, you go into our closure bucket. And then if you start transacting again, you come out. And so that gives us a view of, are they permanently or temporarily closed? And so that number does vacillate. But early on, again, in late March, early April, we saw closure rates, again, in health and beauty up at around 80%, 85%. About 60% of restaurants and 70% of bars were closed. And now those have settled a bit, but those are still, not great numbers. But on both a year over year revenue basis and on a closure rate basis, the second quarter of 2020 was just abysmal. It was like nothing we'd seen the 4 years we've been doing this.
I as you guys as an executive team are sitting around the table looking at this data, or on a Zoom call probably by that point, you're looking at this data. What are you thinking? You're counted on for the data. Are you also counted on for the perspective and the opinion of what's happening? Was that the phone that was ringing? Was that the discussion basically that you guys were having? We really need to start to read the tea leaves here of what's going to happen. Yeah,
you're exactly right. So we did go remote first, very early. So we're a California headquartered business, and we have employees. Yeah, we have some employees in China, for example. And so we had seen early on what this virus was doing in other places. And so we had to think maybe a healthier understanding of what might be coming our way than some other places in the heartland that saw it come later. And so we had been talking about this for months. And when we saw that it really started to get real in the United States, we shut down our offices to people coming into the office and went remote first. And we made some very significant business decisions, and we basically shelved our software sales business basically over the course of a weekend, and pivoted our entire business in 3 distinct ways. One was we started to do very aggressive grassroots advocacy for small business stimulus. So we knew that there needed to be government intervention, or else consumer dollars were not going to keep these businesses afloat. We were one of countless, private sector companies to engage in that with the government. We also started to orient our entire operation, our sales team, our customer support team, even our marketing team around the idea of facilitating these federal paycheck protection program loans. So these were the loans that were guaranteed by the Small Business Administration, provided through a large stimulus bill that went through Congress and signed by the president, and then were administered through application. And so we were taking applications on behalf of lenders that we had good relationships with. We became an SBA approved lender or loan agent. And so we weren't making the loans, but we were trying to help businesses get into the queue, manage the application process, get their documents in order, and then get them in line with an approved lender so that they could get access to that capital. That was a massive undertaking, and we completely pivoted our entire operation around it. And then lastly, we started to organize our product team to start thinking about and building some of the things that we knew would become more relevant when the immediate urgency of COVID passed, and some of these consumer behaviors changed the way that people expected to interact with businesses. So for example, we built a remote payment solution so that anybody can pay with a credit card, any small business, without having to take out their credit card or hand cash to the business. And we've seen that in particular is something that's a behavioral change that has been massive throughout COVID. And so we knew that was going to be something we'd have to build for small businesses to sort of continue to do well or thrive or stay alive even in the sort of post-COVID new normal. So those were very significant things. It was not business as usual at all for us. Very long.
Well, I would imagine it's not revenue as usual either. And I hope you have a generous CFO who is. I've certainly worked for ungenerous CFOs, but I mean, kudos to you guys for really kind of recognizing, we're really showcasing at this event very similar stories of leadership inside of B2SMB brands that really, I'm impressed at how quickly they pivoted. Obviously, you guys did as well, but really the substance of the pivot and in what they were trying to address. So God, there's 1,000 questions, man, I can ask you about the data, but I guess kind of in keeping with the observation that, boy, the consumers are going to suddenly start demanding this card-free means of paying small businesses. What were some other things that early on you guys were observing that really kind of were either were different or were big light bulbs? What were some of those things?
Yeah, some of those things related to existing capabilities that we were already building. So the backstory on kind of what we've been building is we know that most interactions with a physical business, a small business in a local market, don't begin in the place of business. They begin online now. That's a fundamental shift in consumer behavior over the last, call it 10 years. And so, for example, somebody might take out their smartphone, do a near me search, look at what comes up if they're looking for, a tire shop or a restaurant. And then they're going to look at the reviews that come up either, through a Yelp profile or a Google profile or whatever. And that's how they make a decision. So a lot of times the decision has been made before someone goes into a business. So that doesn't change in a post-COVID world. In fact, it's just amplified. So things like we had already built, like our reputation management product, became even more relevant because businesses need a way to interact with consumers where they are and where they're having, kind of like where they're trying to get information about where they're going to spend money. And they need to be able to communicate, A, we're open, B, like we should be a preferred choice when maybe like choices are going to be more constrained. People aren't spending money like they used to because of uncertainty. And so your digital footprint, your ability to communicate with customers becomes paramount. So that it comes down to, being able to manage that online profile for your business and also communicate with customers. So
sorry to interrupt, but do you think that's a permanent change? Or
I think that's a permanent change. I think a lot of the things, this is likely to be with us. The most optimistic scenarios we've seen are that the middle of 2021 is potentially where we may see some real relief that's lasting from sort of like a epidemiology standpoint. And that's plenty of time for people to build completely new habits. And some of these things were already rolling this way
Hmm.
And I think COVID just accelerated the adoption.
Yeah, I think a number of people have made that observation as time has gone on, and it's not that much time, but over the last 6 months, a sense of accelerated evolution that was going to happen anyway. But it was probably like in the case of e-commerce, it probably was going to take 10 years. Instead, it took a few months, and in some cases less for small business to adopt that. So what is without disclosing anything that is proprietary, what's the picture now? What are you seeing?
Yeah. So when we just look at the raw data, and we can draw conclusions or make some sort of like prognostications based on this, but just looking at where we are now as a snapshot, you basically see across all industries with different particulars based on the industry, sort of this reverse check mark. So you had things sailing along at 40,000 feet from a revenue standpoint, massive dip. We pull out of the dip, but then level off at a significantly reduced new normal. And so if you look at just year over year revenue on a year over year basis right now, the snapshot of October is that across all industries that we watch, revenue is down about 20 to 30% versus this same time period last year. You've got about 20% of all small businesses in the sampling that we're looking at, which is hundreds of thousands of businesses that are representative of the small business economy. You've got about 20% of those businesses closed. So 1 in 5 small businesses are effectively closed right now. Among those businesses that are actually open, they're doing slightly better. So options are more limited. People have fewer places to spend their money. Those businesses that are open were probably in a better position anyway. And they're seeing about 5 to 10% more revenue right now at this time of year than they were last year. So, there is some kind of winners and losers dynamics going on here.
So speaking of winners and losers of the average of 30% down, is there a curve? Is there a distribution that, kind of, okay, there's 20% of those that are down are only down this much, they're down by a much smaller percentage. And over here on the extreme end, the down, so does it look like a bell curve? Does it look, like a flat curve? What does it look like?
Yeah, it's a little more chaotic than that, but I think you got the right idea, which is that I think the healthiest way to look at this, the most helpful way to look at this is you can break it down by industry, because obviously every industry weathers these kinds of things differently. So restaurants are an interesting one because on the one hand, they're the most exposed of any that I can think of to sustained losses in revenue, because they have rent, they have employees that they have to pay, they have supplies, and they have perishable supplies. It's like kind of a murderer's row of these negative forces pushing on them if revenue stops. They also, though, have been able to, over the summer months, really adjust to like outdoor dining. They've been able to do sort of curbside, and so they have those advantages working for them. But they've been really hit hard. So year over year revenue for restaurants, full service restaurants, is down 50%, and then for quick serve restaurants, this would be sort of like your Frost Stops or whatever milkshake places that are more independent rather than it being like a Burger King, down 25 to 30%. And 1 in 4 full service restaurants are closed, and 19%, 1 in 5 of quick serve are closed. And even when you isolate just those open businesses for full service restaurants, revenue is still down 15%. So restaurants are really taking it on the chin, and it's going to be I think it's going to be a very difficult winter for them, unfortunately. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got retail, which is like a large category. If you just drill down to two particular ends of the spectrum, like grocery stores and supermarkets, they're doing very well. They've had massive spikes as people were hoarding. The same is true for sporting goods and guns and ammo shops. So obviously, like, finding ammunition's been like a notoriously difficult thing right now, and that's because people are it's flying off the shelves. And so this sort of like prepper mentality of people worrying about what might be next has certainly benefited those parts of the retail ecosystem. Whereas, just the fear of kind of being in public spaces and, what's happening to prepared food when there's a pandemic has really hurt restaurants.
So I think it's intuitive, at least, that the recovery is going to be geographically very uneven, and that geography may even go down to a block group level. I mean, it may be it's very, very small, increments of the map that you see widely uneven success or failure. Um, is there is there a way for us to understand that as national brands who are selling to small businesses across the spectrum? Do you think there will be some form of roadmap? Have you guys thought about a roadmap of that indicates, this area here is really struggling and this area over here is not? So if you're going to really invest marketing dollars or support services, you don't want to crush the guys who are struggling over here, but it's also kind of, it's not, you're not going to sell new ovens to a restaurant that's still closed, right? But you may be able to, sell outdoor furniture to this restaurant over here that's really, starting to come back up again. I guess my question is there a map that can be created that really gives insight into that?
Yeah, so it's a very dynamic thing. We've talked, so we do have that data. So we look at things both on the dimension of industry and also the dimension of geography, like you mentioned. And so we are looking at things in some cases down to like the zip code level or like a cluster of zip codes. We were just, for example, talking with some reporters in New York who were like, hey, I just want to look at Long Island and I just want to look at these industries. And so we do slice the data up that thinly. It's very difficult to make meaningful visualizations. We have on our website something we call our COVID-19 data dashboard for small businesses. We do have a series of maps that will show, just for a constrained time period, the last week, how revenue in different industries is doing on a year-over-year basis for businesses in a particular state. And that's mainly to show kind of directionally what's going on, but we can get much more precise than that. It's just very difficult to visualize and to synthesize and summarize. So if you're trying to communicate this, it's easier if you've said, okay, all I care about is this geography and these industries. Since we're talking nationally, it's a little more difficult, but we do that. And I think one thing that we've observed that I think is easy to distill is that initially the revenue impact was comprehensive. Every state in the country was feeling it more or less the same way because there were massive lockdowns and there was so much fear and uncertainty that even where there weren't maybe like local government restrictions in place on businesses being open, people were still kind of afraid to go out and patronize. As that sort of like that fear is abated, what we've seen is that there's a strong correlation between places where COVID-19 is more or less under control and revenue starting to pick back up. So it's really less about government policies at this point, putting restrictions on consumers. It's more about consumers opting out of spending money when they feel like it's not safe. And so, we're not in the business of, making political or like policy statements on these things, but it does seem like, places where you have better control of the virus tend to do better economically, just because there's some subset of the population that's meaningful that just says, okay, well, I'm not going to risk it.
Yeah, I mean, is there any indication that the consumer behavior in the areas that are doing better is really the result of actually the consumers spending less or going out less? And the places where they're out more are actually the places that are not doing so well. I mean, maybe that's counterintuitive, but is there a correlation there?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we have a bunch of folks that we've sort of partnered with this data. One of them is a group called Opportunity Insights, and this is a think tank that was formed by a collaboration between Harvard and Brown universities. And they've done a bunch of additional analysis on top of what we've already done. And one thing that they found was that in New York City, in Manhattan, some of the biggest impact was actually in very rich neighborhoods, which is interesting because these are the folks who have the disposable income. And these are the folks who you would expect that, as the ripple effects of this economic wave hit and jobs are lost, they still have wealth and they can still go out and sort of stimulate, at least on a very localized basis in a borough of Manhattan, the economy there. But it was the opposite, that the wealthiest places in Manhattan were doing relatively, on a relative basis, much worse. And so one of the things that told us, and when you compared that with the things that we had done at Womply, our own analysis, was that there is this like significant effect of consumers feeling like I'm not going to spend money unless I have to. It's sort of like their old kind of ways of feeling like, hey, it's good times and I can go out and spend willy nilly. They've really constrained that to kind of a more like a small group of necessities, and they're going out less. So a lot of the things, a lot of the categories where you'd be considering sort of discretionary spending, like they're definitely getting hit much harder. So I do think there's an element of, the virus. We've got some fatigue going on, so we have seen, some of that lift the boats a bit with revenue. But in places, especially where there's a little more serious concern over, viral spread, we do see that affects people spending.
Asking you to maybe go a little bit outside of your comfort zone, but if the data, can the data really suggest business and product opportunities for business to small business brands that are, from the data, kind of either currently or future state, indicate, boy, somebody needs to step in and do fill in the blank? Does the data really provide that level of insight, do you think, yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the standard disclaimer I would give here, just to make sure we got our methodology like tight, is that, data tells us kind of what's happening, not what to do about it.
Right,
we
right.
always
Yeah.
we always make distinctions around like correlations and causations, and also like,
Right.
obviously the data isn't telling us, hey, you should build a remote payments product, but you certainly can look at data and draw some intuitive conclusions about we should do this, or maybe we should stop doing this. And I think, in our case, I'll give you a couple of examples of some things that we've been doing at Womply, because I think that they're indicative of what I may be doing if I were at another company. So one was, again, we saw that I think remote payments or contactless payments, or whatever, payment terminology you want to use to apply to that, where there's, you're not having to get out your credit card or hand money over a counter. I think that is going to become like a very embedded consumer preference, and is happening right now. And so I think that that's something the data clearly tells us, is that, where we have, when you look at like individual firm level data, businesses that had like a higher ratio of just credit card transactions in general compared to cash are doing better, because they have better infrastructure. If you're a cash business, that's another concern. If you've got a whole bunch of concerns as a consumer, including I've got less money to spend, one thing you want to take off the table is, do I have to spend dirty cash and get, dirty cash as change? So that's one example. Also, I think there's a whole bunch of opportunity around giving businesses the opportunity to float their cash flow right now, where there's a lack of additional government intervention. So the initial PPP forgivable loan program gave businesses about 8 weeks of payroll. And the intention there, the implied intention, was that we're going to keep you alive until the virus is gone in 2 months. And clearly, you're like, we're not out of the woods with it more than 2 months later. And so how are these businesses going to survive? The political climate doesn't suggest right now that there's like a high degree of probability that we're going to see a second round of stimulus. So can the private sector step in? So one thing that we've done, for example, is we've got a whole bunch of ways that we can help businesses, float, their accounts payable. For example, there's businesses that provide, an array of creative financing solutions to small businesses that allow them to, for example, receive a cash payment, not a loan, but sort of like a cash payment that has repayment terms, but the repayment terms may be based on revenue. So if you've got 25% of your typical revenue, you're going to pay back less on that loan. If you're doing well, you're going to pay back more on that loan. So there's lots of, I think, opportunities in helping businesses solve the most acute problem that they have right now, which is keeping cash flowing.
And you've, I know, been working on a couple of initiatives with the guys from Funbox and the team from Gusto. They've certainly educated me on the magnitude of the challenge of small business collection of their payables, and the breathtaking number that there's $1 billion between large enterprises and government that is currently owed to small business, and the number is probably growing. Has grown since that was captured back, a few months ago. Do you think that there is hope to create a product that will, in a data-driven way, help small businesses better manage cash flow and PS provide them support in creating more of a Fortune 500 view of their payables and its impact on how they run their business.
Yeah, it's a great idea and a great point, because I think it's absolutely needed. I think anytime you see something that has acute unmet need, we work in Silicon Valley, so we see that typically gets filled by some, upstart entrepreneur somewhere. And I think that,
Mhm.
an existing player or a new player will probably create exactly what you're talking about. And the reason I think is clear. And I hope that we don't have to see it too much, carnage for this to become the
Yeah,
case.
too much more pain to wake
Yeah.
up.
But I
Right.
mean, when you think about like the problem statement that small businesses face right now, we did a survey a few years ago asking small businesses, if your sales stopped entirely, how long are you going to stay alive? And we
Mhm.
found that 1 in 5 would be dead in less than 30 days, and that a majority of them, like 80%, would be dead within 90 days. And so what you take away from that is that most of these businesses walk a very fine line with regard to cash flow, and they have built operations on the assumption of regular customer interactions and payments coming from their customers. And if they're a consumer oriented business, they're not going to be able to pay their payables unless they've got consumers coming into their business and spending money on a regular basis. We hear all kinds of stories of businesses having to make decisions between, am I going to pay for my inventory, or am I going to pay my rent, or am I going to pay my employees, because they are so cash strapped. And so, if we can make a decision, either we're going to rely on the government to sort of provide bailouts when, these wind shears happen, or, perhaps, the private sector gets very creative about providing not only the tooling, but also the terms that makes it very attractive to small businesses to use those products.
So as we wrap up, let me ask you the question as again, I'm sure I'm sure a lot of listeners of this are going to be as gobsmacked as I am. How do they actually engage with your data? Is it a subscription? Is it something different? Is it ad hoc? How do they do it?
Yeah, it depends on what kind of business you are. But if you're a small business, the way that you engage with our product, which is powered by our data, is you just go to
I'm
one.
talking really more about the enterprise level. The enterprises that are really gonna the data of my good friend Mitch Jacobs, who founded On Deck, now runs FanBank, founded FanBank. He says transactions are the new cookies, and I love that because that just captures it. It's kind of like there's so much information in transactions that can be used, particularly in our community. You
Yep.
guys are obviously own this enormous treasure trove of transactional data. How can B to SMB enterprises actually engage with that data?
Yep. Good clarification. Thanks for that. We have a very big cookie jar, which is great. And because of that, obviously we want to slice it up in ways that's very useful to, the end user. So we have, for example, if we have the Federal Reserve or the Treasury Department using this data, very different use cases versus someone who's building or enriching, their software that they're
Mhm.
selling to small businesses, and so on and so forth. So there's two ways. One is that you can connect into one of our APIs, and these are already built out. There's access to data, there's like services. So if your business is set up to take in and ingest data through API, that's the easiest way to do it.
Mhm.
And we have products that are built that way to allow you to access financial data or benchmark data, whatever the case might be. So that's very simple. And there's a spot on the bottom of our website in the footer that takes you right to our APIs page and will allow you to contact the team that can help you kind of work through that. And then, if that's a little too sophisticated, sometimes we have people who reach out and they say, well, I want access to data through an S3 bucket. And so we do provide access through S3 as well. A lot of folks are familiar with that. Occasionally, we'll also do some very bespoke work for a specific niche use case and build some custom connective tissue for them as well. So typically it's API, sometimes S3, and every once in a while we've got a very custom situation that comes up as well.
And obviously, you wouldn't mind if I gave gave out your contact information for those who would
Well,
be
great.
interested in pursuing that.
For sure.
Um, and part of the I guess the value of the institute has always been in introductions specifically for partnerships. Do you guys work in partnership form? What kind of partners do you look for? Just answer that.
Yeah, so obviously we have customers that use our data for all kinds of things, but we do have a pretty robust partnerships program as well. And so really anybody who is working with small businesses, either like you have a large portfolio of small businesses, maybe there's like cross marketing opportunities that we could explore, or you have access to data, or you want to kind of like look at data opportunities. So a lot of our partners are in the kind of financial services value chain for small businesses.
Hmm.
And that's everything from the credit card processors down to the point of sale system. We also have partners who are not in the financial services realm, but maybe they're serving small businesses with like an email marketing product, for example. And so there's
Hmm.
interesting ways that we can do cross promotion and co-marketing with those things as well. So we're willing to entertain just about anything with somebody who works to serve small businesses, and a lot of times there's some pretty good mutual benefits that we can find there.
Well, that connective tissue is so critical, and for better or for worse, a lot of the connections that I see from where I sit are anecdotal. So yesterday I was interviewing the head of product for Oracle NetSuite, and had just earlier in the day been talking about a speaking engagement at Progressive Insurance Commercial Division, and the two of them were both observing from very different points of view, very different perspectives. Oracle NetSuite was observing the massive growth on their part of understanding warehouse management. It's in their ERP suite, and the demand for understanding how to manage inventory, manage warehouses, et cetera, was just exploding. Meanwhile, Progressive was noticing that, God, we're writing a lot of policies for warehouses, and there's just I just hope that one day we can start to connect these opportunities to each other that really actually live inside of the small business's head. That's the crazy part, is they know they have a warehouse. They know they need to run it, insure it, make it run, hire people to run, be in the warehouse. They know all those things, but we struggle at a macro level to look down and go, yeah, we should work together on solving what is really a singular problem, not a problem from all of our different perspectives. I would love to work with you on that, to get your insights on that, because I do think that it can be data driven. I mean, you've revealed that, hey, there's a lot of information that can be extracted from what is going on in the form of transactions at small business.
Yeah.
Oh, Brad Plothow, this has been fantastic. I mean, Plothow, sorry. Been fantastic. Much appreciated. Really think it's informative. I'd love to have you back, on a frequent basis, and figure out ways in which we can plug in all of these insights and data to our broader community. Much appreciated.
Well, right back at you. Really appreciate it. Thanks for all you're doing for small businesses and those that serve them, and happy to be a part of this.
Thanks. Take
Thanks.
care.